Hello and welcome to Shattered Lives. I'm Michael O'Toole and I'm joined as ever by Paul Healy. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Michael.
So today we're going to be talking about a man called Dave Mahon. Now, it's almost a saga involving Mr. Mahan, really stretching back a long time. We're going to get into that. But you were at a court case today which was very significant for Mr. Mahan.
Yes, this is a long ongoing court case before Carrick-on-Shannon Circuit Court, and today Dave Mahon was acquitted of assaulting his neighbour, a pensioner by the name of Jim Fahey.
So that was a very serious case for him, because if he had been convicted, he was facing the possibility of probably up to 5 years in prison, because the Circuit Court has wider and more strict sentencing powers than the lower district court. So when you're in front of the Circuit Court, you're in super trouble.
Massive trouble, and let's be honest, Dave Mahon is no stranger to the court, in essence because of the fact that he served a prison sentence for manslaughter, the manslaughter of his stepson Dean Fitzpatrick, and that's how most people would know him. He's also the stepfather of Amy Fitzpatrick, a teenager who went missing, and we can get into all of that. We can talk about it now.
So, but before we get into that, just today he had been charged with assaulting a man, and was it Jim Fahey, was it?
Jim Fahey, yeah.
Okay, and who was he? He was his neighbour.
Yeah, so Dave has been living in a place called Breffni Crescent in Carrick-on-Shannon for the past couple of years, ever since he was released from prison, from Wheatfield prison, all the way back in 2021, July 2021. So only a couple of weeks after that, this incident happened between Jim Fahey and Dave Mahon at a barbecue. So Dave and Audrey, they were invited to this barbecue at Jim Fahey's house on the 26th of August 2021. And Dave reluctantly, he says, agreed to go to this barbecue. He was reluctant, he said, because people were intoxicated, including his own wife, Audrey. This is the evidence that was heard in court. But he went at the invitation of Jim Fahey. They had a couple of beers. Everything appeared to be going okay. And then this incident happened. Now, there are two different versions of this event, but the key to this is the other version of events, Mr. Fahey's version of events, were not heard in court because Mr. Fahey failed to show up. To give people a wider context of this case, we have been down to Carrick-on-Shannon so many times. I've been down at least 10 times to this case. It has been heard since 2021.
Yeah, I think I was down twice over it, because it kept on getting put back. And obviously when it goes to the Circuit Court, there are various stages and hoops that you have to go through. So he always, in all the times I've been speaking to him, he always maintained his innocence in relation to this.
He did. And, from the very start, to be fair, we have a relationship with Mr. Mahan and his wife, Audrey. We've done interviews with them over the years. And certainly they had told us from the beginning that the truth would come out on this, and their side of events is that Mr. Fahey was the aggressor and that Dave Mahon was acting in self-defense. And we ultimately heard that in the court case. But Mr. Fahey never showed up in court, and we never really found out the reason why until this week, and in the absence of the jury. So an awful lot of stuff is heard in the absence of a jury. In a trial, it's heard as legal argument, and ultimately the jury actually never heard this, that Jim Fahey has actually been in Sligo University Hospital for the past 53 days. He is unwell, but it's nothing to do with this particular case. But aside from that, Gardaí investigating this have been on multiple occasions attempting to get Mr. Fahey to engage, and they ultimately issued a court summons for him to make him come to court. And just, if you disobey that, by the way, you can be arrested, and I'll come back to that. But Mr. Fahey, there was multiple attempts to serve him, and we heard from a Detective Garda, Mark Burke, who's now based in Sligo, but he was based at the time in Carrick-on-Shannon. He's the lead investigating officer, and he attempted to serve Mr. Fahey this week. This is when Gardaí actually found out that he was in hospital, because the front door or the back door of the property was open, and they thought that was suspicious, and there was dog poop inside, just on the floor. Jesus. And so Gardaí actually entered the property, concerned for Mr. Fahy's welfare, and then they subsequently found out that he had been in hospital for the past 53 days, and we actually heard that he's being referred on possibly next to a nursing home. So he's quite unwell. And
he's in his 70s, isn't he?
He is 73 now. He was 70 at the time of this incident between him and Dave Mahon. Now, I'm kind of going forwards to go backwards, but we should go back to the incident itself, because there was a fracas, I suppose you could call it that. There was an engagement between these two men, but both of them have differing opinions about what exactly happened. Dave admits that he headbutted Jim Fahy, but he says that he did so in self-defense. So they were at this barbecue, they were having a wonderful time, but supposedly, according to Dave, and this is the only account that we got in court, this was the account that he gave to Gardaí upon his arrest a couple of days after the incident. And by the way, Dave didn't request a solicitor. He just he gave a very lengthy statement to Gardaí, which we heard in full, and the jury heard in full, where he said that an argument started over the fact that the barbecue that they were trying to have basically wouldn't start, and Dave cracked a joke where he said perhaps maybe we should be getting McDonald's instead. He says that Jim Fahy took offence to that, and that he made a derogatory remark towards Audrey. Now, he said to Gardaí he wouldn't repeat what was said to Audrey, and indeed he subsequently still hasn't told me what was said, but he said it was enough to cause quite a bit of tension, and basically everything changed from that moment, and he felt that Mr. Fahy was being quite serious. Dave says that he got up and told Audrey, right, we're going to leave. And so in order to leave, they had to go through the back of the property, through the kitchen, through the hallway, and out the front door. And Audrey left with their two dogs that they brought with them. And Dave says that he tried to leave shortly afterwards. What happened next was disputed and caused this whole case in the first place, because Mr. Fahy alleged that he was assaulted by Mr. Mahan in that moment. Dave says that Mr. Fahy punched him first. Now, we heard another witness in the case said that Mr. Fahy put his hand up against Dave Mahon's face, but he said it didn't make contact, and that Dave then headbutted him and repeatedly punched him. He thought up to 20 times, and that he and another woman who was at the particular barbecue, Tony Scott, tried to get involved and break up the fight effectively. Now, this witness, Mr. Noel Byrne, he's the only other witness in this case, and he was summoned to court, and he admitted he didn't want to be there. And there had been, again, in the absence of the jury, discussion about trying to get Mr. Byrne to court, and ultimately he was summoned by a plainclothes undercover Garda, and he was brought to court, and he said he was only coming to court because he knew he'd be arrested otherwise. Now, he said that Dave struck first. He said he intervened, and he maintained that Dave was the aggressor. Obviously, Dave denies that. So the two of them are on the ground, and Mr. Fahy was left black and blue with two black eyes. We were shown photographs in court of his injuries. You know, it's a horrific photo. Anyone with two black eyes looks terrible. Both eyes are swollen, and there was blood all over the floor.
And who showed that picture? Was it the state prosecutor?
Gardaí, there are Garda photographs, and they were administered as an exhibit in the case. So the jury were shown these photographs that were taken by Gardaí in Sligo Hospital the following day of Mr. Fahy, who gave a statement to Gardaí at the time, alleging that he was assaulted by Dave Mahon. So
the guards seem to be in a very difficult position here, because if Mr. Fahy was unable or whatever to give evidence, then that's a serious plank of the state case against Dave Mahon.
Yeah, and that's ultimately the reason why this case fell apart. Look, Dave Mahon was actually acquitted. It's not that the trial collapsed.
So it wasn't just to explain to listeners, there can be an acquittal, but you can also do, if you think, say, about Patrick Hutch, totally unconnected to this, but this is the best example, a nolle prosequi. So the state can enter a nolle prosequi, and we're going to effectively pause it and shelve it. But that wasn't happening. That didn't happen in this case. Mr. Mahan was fully vindicated. He was acquitted.
Yes, I'd say partially because of the fact that a good chunk of the trial was heard in the entire prosecution's case, all right, albeit in the absence of Mr. Fahy, probably the most important witness of all, was heard before the jury. So the trial commenced, and the jury heard quite a bit. So on the basis of the fact that there wasn't enough evidence, Judge John Aylmer decided that if he were to correctly charge a jury, if he were to correctly charge a jury, that the jury would not, if they convicted Dave Mahon, that the conviction wouldn't be safe because the trial was unfair, he felt. So he said that the only direction he could make was to direct the jury to find Dave Mahon not guilty and to acquit him, and that's what he did this morning.
But that was not a surprise to you and to everybody else who was in the courtroom yesterday.
No, it was a surprise to me that the case progressed as much as it did, in terms of that a jury was sworn in the first place and that the trial commenced, because we knew from the get-go that Mr. Fahy wasn't playing ball, that they weren't going to be able to bring him to court, and we knew that the other two witnesses in the case, Tony Scott and Noel Byrne, also didn't want to come to court, and summons were issued for them. In fact, a bench warrant was issued for Tony Scott because she failed to show up. Gardaí went looking for her. They called to her address, a camper van, couldn't find her. Then they allowed a good chunk of time for Miss Scott to try and show up. They thought maybe she was on a bus on her way to court. They ultimately determined she wasn't on her way to court. They never found her, and the case progressed without her. She was another key witness in the case. And then Mr. Byrne, as much as he said that he believed Dave Mahon threw 20 punches, he admitted that he saw only 2 of those punches and he heard the rest. And as much as he claimed that Dave Mahon was the aggressor, the court ultimately heard there wasn't enough evidence to really suggest that could be relied upon as the only evidence that Dave Mahon was the aggressor in the case.
So Mr. Justice Aylmer acquitted Dave Mahon. What was the reaction in court? Were there many people in court for it?
There weren't many people in court for it, no. And then I was the only reporter in court today. But Mr. Mahan was obviously, Dave was obviously, I keep calling Mr. Mahan, but I know him as Dave, obviously know him a long time, was delighted, obviously, as was his wife, Audrey. I've done an interview with Dave. Yes, I've interviewed him, and we will be releasing this interview either later tonight, or it'll be online on the Irish Mirror tomorrow, and it'll be in the Star and the Mirror tomorrow. But just to give you, I suppose, some of the preview, maybe what he says is not a shock to some people. You know, he feels that this has been a waste of time, that this has cost the taxpayer an awful lot of money. He has been told, I'm saying that these are figures that Dave Mahon is saying now, I'm not saying these are my figures, but I'd say he's not far off the mark, that this has cost the state, i.e. the taxpayer, €400,000. It's definitely a 6-figure sum or close to it, because in fairness, this has been going on since 2021 with multiple delays. He says he's been in court 22 times, and ultimately, he's been acquitted. He feels it's a waste of time because, and in fairness, I should also say that the court heard evidence that Mr. Fahy wanted to retract his statement, and in 2023 actually issued a statement to Gardaí saying that he was making of his own free will a statement that he wanted to retract his previous statement and that he had no issue with Dave Mahon. The same with Mr. Byrne and Miss Scott. They apparently also wanted to retract their statements.
And that's
yet it went ahead.
And that's an interesting point, because I remember there was legislation brought in, I'm just speaking generally, I'm not talking about this case, that if someone retracts their statement or refuses to give evidence in a case, Gardaí now have the power to take their original statement, their original injured party statement, and use that in court.
Yeah, and just in case anybody accuses me of being, one-sided, look, Dave has been acquitted. That is the letter of the law. But Mr. Fahy, had very serious, brutal injuries. We saw horrific photographs of those injuries. And at least the Garda perspective was this was a horrific assault. They believe that Mr. Fahy was very, very badly assaulted. And in fact, they wanted to upgrade it at one point from a Section 3 assault to a Section 4 assault. That ultimately didn't happen. But as far as they were concerned, Dave Mahon brutally assaulted this elderly man. And that was their position on it.
And that's a really interesting point. Section 3 is assault causing harm. Okay, so Section 2 is assault simple. It could be a shove, right? I think it could even be violent words. Anyway, but Section 3 is assault causing harm, which is at the circuit court. Section 4 is, I think it's assault causing serious harm, is it? But it is very rarely used.
Yes, and I think you possibly up to a life in prison.
Oh no, it's heavy. It is really heavy. So who the state prosecutor, Fiona Crawford, was it?
Fiona Crawford, BL, in fairness, an
She did her
excellent
best,
state
but
prosecutor, and she executed the case to the best of her ability. They did everything they could in terms of the evidence that they had, and that's it. They're just doing their job. I mean, they probably would have wanted Mr. Fahy to be there, and he would have been their star witness. He would have been the key witness.
you must feel for any barrister who has a state witness who decides not to be a state witness. That must cause you difficulties.
Massive difficulties, and I'm sure that they were frustrated that they had to proceed on that basis, but that was the direction from the DPP, to proceed without him.
Now, let me ask you this, Paul. Obviously, you've interviewed Dave, Mr. Mahan.
Yeah.
Did he give any indication of what he and Audrey, his wife, plan to do in the future?
I think Dave says he just wants to get on with his life. He feels that his position is that he's been persecuted by the state. He feels there is bias against him, both from the media, although I would disagree with him on that, and from the state. Dave is a convicted killer. Let's not move away from that fact. He was convicted of manslaughter, yes, and he says he did kill his stepson, Dean Fitzpatrick, the brother of Amy Fitzpatrick, who went missing in Spain. He killed him in 2013. Now, Dave's position is that Dean walked into the knife, and he was convicted of manslaughter. The state wanted a murder charge and brought a murder charge against him. Ultimately, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter. But he feels on that basis that the fact that he is a convicted killer and that he is infamous, quote unquote, thanks to the media, he believes that there was a conspiracy against him and that people wanted him locked away again, and that's the only reason that this continued and continued and continued, even in the absence of Mr. Fahy. He feels it wouldn't have happened to anybody else. It could only happen to him, he feels. Now, I did press him. I did ask, because in fairness, Dave did headbutt this man. And I certainly felt, I said, look, it's difficult to put myself in his shoes, but I would say not everybody would headbutt someone. It's not the response that you would expect most people to do. That's what he said he did in self-defense. So I said, in fairness, Dave, that's not something most people would do. And he said, well, look, I was just out of prison 3 weeks.
I wonder, is there a context to that? I wonder, was he still in prison mode?
Yeah.
I'm just being charitable.
He said, I was only out of prison 3 weeks. Maybe I was in that mode. I don't know. I'd come from not a nice place of watching your back and all that. He said, that's not an admission of anything. I had just gotten a box. He's not a small man. The papers have it that I battered an old age pensioner. I'm not here to slate Mr. Fahy. I have no problem with him, and he's no problem with me whatsoever. That's what he said.
Just getting back to this, I think would it be fair to say that Mr. Mahan would have known for quite some time that Mr. Fahy did not really want to give evidence?
Yes, and the trial also heard in the absence of the jury that Dave actually received a phone call from Audrey, and she was in the presence of Mr. Fahy at the time, and that Mr. Fahy supposedly told him, that he wanted to drop the charge. He didn't want to give a statement, and he didn't want anything to go any further. So Dave, as far as Dave is concerned, he had been told that and had communicated that multiple times. And he would say that he has a good relationship with Jim Fahy, who, by the way, is only living 2 doors up from him. So, I mean, he would see him routinely, so he maintains they have a good relationship, and that Mr. Fahy, we can't speak to Mr. Fahy, he's in hospital, but he would say that Mr. Fahy has no issue with him and didn't want this case to progress in the first place. Okay,
so I think maybe we should delve a bit more into the wider context, and probably one of the reasons why you were there today, because of Amy Fitzpatrick. And at this stage, I need to declare an interest. I wrote a book. I ghost wrote a book. Audrey, Dave's wife, mother of Amy Fitzpatrick, who went missing in 2008, wrote a book in 2012, and I ghost wrote it for her. It was about the disappearance of her daughter and everything that happened to her family up until that time. At that stage, it was 4 years. It's now 17 years that she's missing, and it's still one of the enduring Irish mysteries. But I just want to get that on the record, and I want to state my interest in this. But the case of Amy Fitzpatrick is a real mystery.
It's a baffling case, and I think it has been largely forgotten about. In I would criticize ourselves even as well, although we do interview Dave and Audrey at times, and
Well, sorry, Paul, hold on a second.
You can disagree with me.
No, yeah, I don't think we're the news organisation that deserves least criticism of this, because we have done more stories about Amy and more stories about the whole Fitzpatrick and Mahan family than any other news organisation. So I'm going to respectfully disagree with you on that. However,
no, I'm not criticising any one particular. I'm just saying I feel, it like, the Madeleine McCann case, for example, like, it is just in the public consciousness, but I wonder, because Amy is a teenage girl, and there was, at least in the early days, maybe an assumption that she just ran away or something. Well, there is more to it than that. She just disappeared off the face of the planet. She
did. And I was there. So it was New Year's Day 2008 that she spoke to her Audrey on New Year's morning, and that was the last time Audrey spoke to her. And she was declared missing a couple of days later because she didn't come home the day after. And I and a number of other Irish journalists went over to Spain that week when she was declared missing. And I can still remember the first time I met Dave and Audrey. It was in a sort of hotel. They were holding a press conference, so we were there. And I remember seeing Dean, who was Amy's brother. He was 23 when Dave killed him in 2013, but this was 5 years earlier, and he was only 16, 17, and he was still a kid. Terrible case. I'm going to give you my position in this. I think Amy Fitzpatrick has been largely forgotten, unlike Madeleine McCann. So Madeleine McCann went missing in May 2007. So it was less than a year later, and even in January 2008, the papers were still full, really, of Madeleine McCann. And we had an Irish girl gone missing in Spain. So there was significant public interest and media interest in this. But she's been forgotten about. And I'm going to tell you why I think she's been forgotten about, because she's a working class girl.
I agree with you completely on that as well.
The Madeleine McCann, nice middle class family, and various papers and all got behind the family. And for me, it's terrible that this girl, I wrote a book about her. You have taken over the mantle, I suppose, of doing a lot of stories about Amy. But she's been forgotten about. She was a 15-year-old Irish girl, just turning 16. It would have been 16 in February of 2008. And something has happened to her. If you speak to Audrey, I'll put it, sometimes Audrey accepts she's dead, and then sometimes she says, no, I've still got hope. It's her daughter, right? But Amy Fitzpatrick has been forgotten about by Ireland.
I think largely also because a lot of assumptions have been made in the case about what may have happened. And that's wrong as well. People have just assumed that Dave and Audrey have something to do with it. The only reason I can say this is because obviously I've put this to them before, and they repeatedly deny it, and there is absolutely no evidence that they have anything to do with Amy's disappearance. But nonetheless, they are repeatedly accused on social media every time we write a story about them. Particularly Dave. Okay, granted, you can understand where the thought process comes from, because Dave did kill Dean Fitzpatrick. And people feel that he murdered Dean, although, he would deny that.
And he was acquitted of that.
Yes. And so, people are entitled to their opinion, but it is an opinion that is without any evidence or foundation at this point until proven otherwise, and they obviously have insisted their innocence. But I think because there's a little bit of an assumption there, or the parents said something, that Dave and Audrey in some way, sorry, Dave is the stepfather, he's not the father of Amy, that they may have had something to do with it. It's kind of thrown away in people's minds. Also, the fact that there is a lot of secrecy in the Guardia Civil, it's another country away. We don't really know the state of the investigation, although I think it would be safe to assume that it's gone cold. Gardaí aren't actively involved in it. It's in another country. So to a degree, it's been dropped. And I think assumptions have been made. And, who knows what happened to that girl? I think it needs to be started from scratch. From day one, what happened? Where did she go? All kinds of different theories have been floated. of which we could talk about for 2 hours. But there are multiple suspects. One of whom was, for example, the Gangland criminal and convicted killer Eric Lucky Wilson was thrown into the mix. There are other alleged Gangland figures that she was hanging around.
Something has just come to mind. I knew somebody who was connected to Eric Wilson, and I'm told he got really, really annoyed when his name was mentioned in relation to Amy. I'm only, look, don't shoot, nobody should shoot the messenger. I'm only telling you what was said to me. It was someone who was related to him, very close related to him, and she said he got really, really annoyed about that. Now, look, I'm just saying it as what it is. But I just want to mention, anybody who follows me on Twitter will know that I've been in the Star 25 years, and I was tweeting about this, and they were and thanks for everybody for all the kind messages. But I was talking to Paul beforehand about various stories that have come to mind. The death of Dean Fitzpatrick is one of the incidents in my 25 years in the Star that I will never, ever forget.
Well, I mean, it's safe to say, I can ask you this, can I, that you got a phone call that I think no one really would ever expect to get.
Right. So just to explain again, I did the book with Audrey in 2012. So this was 2013. So it was just, it was probably less than a year. I think the book came out maybe June 2012, and the killing of Dean happened in May 2013. So I was up in my late mummy's house up in North Belfast on the end of May. It was a Sunday morning, 7 o'clock, and I was lying in bed, and my phone rang, right? And you know when you get a thing, and I looked at the number and said, Jesus, why is he ringing me? And actually, it may have been a message. I think it was a message, and it said, it's just a message. Yeah, it was a message. I'll never forget it. It said, Dave Mahon has killed his stepson Dean and is on the run. And I was like, holy shit. 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Yeah. And you know what? He did. The guards were looking for him because he was driven. You'll remember covering the court case. He was driven away, and he did throw the knife out the window somewhere, and it was never recovered. And he was later arrested and charged with murder. Now he was acquitted, but he was arrested and he was held for quite some time. It must have been 24 hours, and he was released. And I took a chance when he got out of the Garda custody. He was held, I think he was held in Coolock Garda Station. So I knew where he lived because that's where I'd been interviewing Audrey for the book. So he was released, I don't know, maybe 2:30 or something, but 4:30 that day. I went and knocked on the door. And Paul, when you're doing a door knock, you knock. I asked you this yesterday. How long would you give it when you knock on a door before you walk away?
30 seconds.
Yeah.
30 seconds.
So I knocked and there was nothing, but something made me stay. Maybe I knew he was in it, I don't know. Something made me stay. And I stayed at the door for about 2 minutes. And it opened, and Dave Mahon was standing there, and he brought me in, and we had a big interview. And then later on that week, I interviewed Audrey and Dave together. First interview after the killing of Dean. She was obviously still in bits, and I'll never forget it. She said about Dave, I love him, I hate him, but I forgive him.
And she went on to marry him.
She did. I was asked to go to the wedding. I was at the wedding. My Jim Walpole, our photographer, do you remember Jim? Jim and I were at the wedding. So we were the only journalists there. So yeah, it was
extraordinary.
And actually, I think we broke the story that they were getting married. We did, and I was like, people just couldn't believe it. There was a huge reaction, but just there were so many twists and turns in the, let's call it the Amy Fitzpatrick saga, from 2008 up to 2021 when this incident happened, and he's now been acquitted. But it's just one thing after the, like, we know, for example, that when they were searching for Amy, they did meet serious gangsters in Ireland to see if they could help them.
Oh yeah, Dave
reached out.
Dave openly admits now, and we have reported that he met Daniel Kinahan, and he also met the monk, Jerry the Monk Hutch.
Now, I'm going to say something. The one thing about Daniel Kinahan that has always been in my mind, right, and people don't want to hear this, but this is just me as a human. I remember he did a fun run raising money for Amy Fitzpatrick. And that is, I know what Daniel Kinahan does, I know everything, but I know that he was very helpful to that family. And it has always been there, that small nugget in relation to him.
Yeah, well, I think it's possible to be multifaceted as a person. You can be charitable and still be a psychopathic criminal and murderer. And obviously, at that point, maybe in Daniel Kinahan's life, he wasn't running the cartel. I mean, his father was, but I mean, he was still a serious criminal.
He was a serious gangster.
But Dave would say and has said, actually, that they've prayed to God and the devil, and that they found the underworld figures like Kinahan and Hutch to be very helpful. At that point in time, the monk and Kinahan probably would have been on the same side, so to speak, although Jerry Hutch would probably say he never really knew Daniel, but they weren't enemies at that point in time.
Well, I'll put it this way. The Hutch crime gang and the Kinahan crime gang would have worked very closely, and we do know that various members of it hived off. But yeah, so Dave Mahon went and met the two main protagonists looking for Amy, and he says, "You're right. I remember that Audrey said, I'll meet the devil and I'll meet God and I'll meet the angels. Whoever I will meet, I will meet to help find Amy."
They did receive interesting information from the underworld. Whether it's true or not, we don't know. And in fairness, we have no idea whether the Guardia Civil, I mean, all of this was said to them, but we have no idea whether they actively investigated it. But Amy was supposedly in the company of some very serious British criminal figures in the days before she disappeared. And I recall only recently a friend of hers came forward and actually corroborated that account to some degree, that Amy was hanging around people I'm not going to name here, but her and a friend supposedly used to get into cars with these criminals, basically so that they could get past police checkpoints, because they would have a female in the car with them, and they would get paid for that. So she was hanging around with unsavory characters, supposedly, and getting paid by these people. So there are certainly other suspects to look at, and Dave points the finger at multiple people, other than the public pointing fingers at him.
Which they have.
Who knows what happened to that poor girl? I would say, and I want you to just talk to me about this. There are a lot of questions about whether or not Amy had her phone with her on New Year's Eve. She phoned her mother, Audrey, and wished her Happy New Year. Audrey would say that phone call came from a landline. Ashley Rose is a friend of Amy Fitzpatrick, and Amy was staying with Ashley Rose at her mother Debbie's home in Spain at the time on New Year's, and stayed overnight. And there have been accounts given that Amy allegedly had her phone with her, and that is disputed. That is disputed by Audrey and Dave. Audrey found the phone, Amy's phone, in the bedroom, her bedroom, after she disappeared.
Right. So
there are questions around that.
Yeah. Well, look, let's look at it logically. If Amy had her phone with her at Ashley Rose's house, and Audrey found the phone in Amy's bedroom,
then Amy made it home.
Yeah, and then Amy made it home. Right. You don't have to be Inspector Clouseau to work that out.
Yeah.
But Audrey had the phone with her. She appeared in the Late Late Show mid-2008 when there was some publicity about Amy, and she had it then, and I think it was a pink phone. Okay, and it's quite significant because people are fixating on that. All I can tell you is, Audrey has always told me, in all the time I've known her, that the phone was in the house or in the bedroom, and even when she told me about the last hours with her, she said that Amy rang her from Ashley Rose's landline. Now, I presume the cops have been able to check this because they can, do all that sort of stuff. But we're going to have to do a pod on this, but we're just going to have to examine this more. But anyway, I remember that was one of the things that I was looking at, doing some research. And I found Gardaí who listen to this, and lots of guards and police from other places listen to this pod, right? And they'll always tell you the best statements you can get from a witness are the earlier ones. So if you tell me something happened, say it happened on a Monday, and you tell me on a Tuesday what happened, if you give your statement to the guards, but then 6 months later you come back and you give a statement, which is more likely to be authentic and closer to the bone? Surely the one that happened closest to the incident. So I found some media reports from the time when Ashley was interviewed the week or two after Amy disappeared, and she said Amy didn't have the phone.
Interesting.
So look, who knows? But I'm just telling you what the reports, and they were in Spanish media, and they all reported that. So look, I've seen that. So people can change their views and they can remember things, but that I'm just telling you what the reports that I saw at the time were. And Audrey has consistently said, does it make sense if this was some sort of massive cover up, that she would bring a phone with her that she knew Amy had when she was missing? How does that make sense? Occam's razor. Let's always talk about Occam's razor. The simple answer is usually the right answer. So I'm only telling you what the media reports at the time, what Isley said in her interviews. But it's something we should explore.
Yeah, and look, for what it's worth, Dave says that he wants to go back to Spain and he wants to continue to put out there, Amy's face and to continue to campaign. Something that actually was very interesting that I didn't realize, something that came up from this case, is that Dave, for the past 3.5 years, had no passport, that his passport was revoked as a result of his bail conditions. So he hasn't been able to leave the country. He says that he would, now that he has his passport back, like to go back to Spain at some point. So Dave and Audrey say that they haven't given up hope in searching for Amy, although they have both said they believe that she's probably dead at this point, because she would have made contact at this point.
I'm just going to make one final point, Paul. Amy was very, very unhappy in Spain. She wanted to come back and live in Ireland. Nobody can deny that she was deeply unhappy in Spain. Look, I think, was she 10, maybe 11 when they left Coolock, or 10, to go and live in Spain? And, it's hard for anybody, and especially at that age, all your friends are in Ireland and you're brought over to Spain. She did have some friends, but she was bullied. She moved to school a couple of times, and she was a really, really unhappy girl in Spain, and she wanted to come home to Ireland.
Yeah, and there have been claims, but again denied by Dave and Audrey, that Amy was in some way afraid of her stepfather, Dave.
There's so there are so many twists and turns to this. Do you remember all the diaries that she'd written, and people tracked down in Gatwick who had the diaries, and the friend who's making all these claims, and the mother of the friend, and there's so many twists and turns. It really has been a saga, and I'm not using that word lightly.
Yeah, I mean, Dave has said, for what it's worth, he hopes that this particular case is the end of, I suppose, his hardships he has come into ever since. Obviously he served 5 years in prison for killing Dean, and he says he has to live with that and for the rest of his life, that he feels terrible about that incident. Obviously he said that Dean was a troubled young man, and that Dean ran into a knife that Dave had actually taken off Dean and was in his hand, and he's that's what he said happened in that incident. I did say to him, I did put it to him, you'll read it in the interview tomorrow, that I said, there, in terms of a public perception, you are either a violent thug who has killed your stepson, who people believe had something to do with the disappearance of your stepdaughter, and who brutally assaulted his neighbour, or you are one of the unluckiest people in Ireland. And you'll see his answer to that. But that's the way that people see it, I think. There's not a lot of sympathy for him. No. Probably even when you read the comments on this YouTube video, they will probably not be very sympathetic to Dave and Audrey either. They know that. They're aware of that. They say they don't care what people think. They say they've nothing to do with Amy's disappearance. They say that what happened with Dean was a tragedy. And they say that what happened with Mr. Fahy was a misunderstanding and should never have gotten as far as it got.
I think about Amy a lot.
Same, yeah.
I do. I think about her an awful lot, and I hope that someday the truth will come out about what happened to her and she'll be found.
Well, I believe there are people out there who know exactly what happened to Amy Fitzpatrick. And you just hope that someone with a conscience or someone that knows them eventually comes forward and tells the truth.
But that's not beyond the realms of possibility. There have been several cases in Ireland where people have had conscious attacks, or whatever you want to call it, and they have come forward. You know, people talk about time being a great healer. Time can eat away at your conscience, and somebody can go, "Look, I'm doing it now." You just never know. It could happen.
And I just want to mention, because I'd be remiss of me not to, that aside from Dave and Audrey, there are many people, friends and other family members, and I want to particularly mention Amy's father, Christopher, and her aunt, Christine, who have also been tirelessly over the years campaigning for answers and for justice, and they have their own views about what happened. So there are many people who have kept Amy's name alive and continue to want to find out what happened to her. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention them as well.
When Amy disappeared, I went to the scene with Christopher. And we brought him to the scene. We drove him up to the scene where she was last, and that was very emotional for him. So he's been through a terrible time as well.
Yeah, and it's a never-ending saga. I don't know how many stories we've written about this case and what's happened to these people. But
like even you think about it, Paul, even the story we did about Audrey marrying Dave, it was just one of those mad stories. Did not see it coming at all.
Well, a lot of people don't understand that, and really only Dave and Audrey can understand the relationship that they have. A lot of people, and Audrey will even say that she had great difficulty forgiving Dave in the beginning, as you mentioned. You know, they obviously are bound together through the grief and the trauma that they've both suffered in a way, and in a way they both very much need each other. I mean, Audrey spent 5 years without Dave when he was in prison, and all she could do was talk about the day that he got out. She's always stood by and stayed by his side, despite all of the horrendous things that have happened since.
Poor Amy. God love her.
Right,
it's all about
we'll
Amy.
leave it there. We should leave it there. I think we should do a whole podcast on that, and we could talk about that for hours on end, I'm sure.
It's a remarkable story, and it's a very sad story.
Actually, there is one thing I wanted to mention. I've neglected to mention, because people will also, and have said already on social media, that in relation to this case that's just happened, that the only reason why the witnesses haven't come forward is because Dave must have paid them off, or he must have intimidated them in some way. I have also put that to Dave, and you can see his answer to that. Obviously, he's denying it. But, we don't shy away from asking Dave these questions, and nor does he shy away, to be fair to him, from answering those questions. So you can read all that on the Mirror and the Star, either later tonight or tomorrow morning.
Okay. Thanks, Paul, and thanks, everybody.